At first, she was just my girlfriend's best friend, the one who came by the garage with her neat hair and quiet perfume, laughing like she didn't belong anywhere near grease or broken engines. But there was something about how she carried herself, like the world could fall apart and she'd still fold her sleeves perfectly. She was in her mid-40s, I guessed. Sharp eyes, soft voice. The kind of calm that made you lower yours without realizing. When she first walked into my workshop that morning, sunlight spilled across the floor, cutting through the dust, and for a second it looked like the whole place had been waiting for her. "Can you take a look at my car?" she'd said, tapping her fingers on the counter, not impatient, just contained. I remember wiping my hands on a rag, pretending to focus on the clipboard. "Depends how bad it is." "It's making a sound," she said, a half-smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. A judgmental one. That made me laugh, too quickly. She noticed. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe it was because she didn't look away right after, like most people do when they sense they've stirred something. She held my gaze just long enough to make it feel personal. Then she blinked, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and the world went back to its normal hum. Her name was Laura. She'd been around before, but always as the shadow behind my girlfriend's laughter, the one driving her home, the one who knew when to step aside. But that morning, she wasn't anyone's anything. She was just here, and I was suddenly aware of how young my hands looked against the black of her car's paint. While I checked under the hood, she leaned against the doorway, watching, not in the way people watch mechanics work, more like she was thinking about something else entirely, using me as a place to rest her eyes. I caught her reflection in the windshield, unreadable, distant. "Do you ever get tired of fixing things?" she asked quietly. I didn't answer right away. The question felt too accurate. "Sometimes," I said, "but it's worse leaving them broken." Her lips parted just slightly, not a smile, not quite. More like she understood something I hadn't meant to share. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, but it was alive. You could almost hear it breathing between us, the clink of tools, the hum of a fan, her slow exhale. When I told her the car would take a day or two, she nodded, slipped her sunglasses on, and said, "You're careful with your hands. Don't lose that." I should have just said thank you. I should have gone back to work. But her words landed differently, like they weren't about engines or repairs at all. She left, and the shop felt bigger after she was gone. The air felt too still. My girlfriend texted me later that afternoon, something about dinner plans, and I kept reading the message without replying, seeing Lara's reflection in that windshield instead. It wasn't attraction. Not yet. It was something quieter, something I couldn't name. The kind of moment that slips under your skin and waits. That night, I tried to forget the way she said it. "You're careful with your hands." But when I finally lay in bed, eyes half open to the dark, the words came back again, soft and deliberate, like they were meant for a version of me that didn't exist yet. And I realized, even then, long before anything happened, I was already in trouble. The sun had already dipped behind the buildings, and the air smelled faintly of rain and motor oil. I was cleaning up, half listening to the hum of the radio, when the bell above the garage door chimed. Laura stepped in wearing the same navy coat, her hair slightly damp, a few strands clinging to her cheek. She looked tired, not in a dramatic way, just human, like she'd been holding herself together too long. "Is it ready?" she asked. "Almost. Just finishing the alignment." She nodded, eyes drifting over the mess, the tools, the smudged coffee mug, the folded rag on the counter. Her presence slowed everything down. "You work late," she said. "Yeah, fewer distractions." She smiled faintly, then caught herself, as if she'd given away too much. I watched her rub her wrist, a nervous habit, maybe, before she reached into her bag. "Your girlfriend said she's coming by later," she added, her tone softer now. Should I wait? It was the first time she mentioned her. And just like that, the air shifted, heavier, more complicated. I shook my head. "You don't have to." She hesitated, her hand resting on the car door. "You sure?" I nodded, but she didn't move. Instead, she leaned against the frame, folding her arms, watching the rain start again through the open side door. The shop lights reflected off her skin, and for a moment I saw the exhaustion there. the kind that doesn't come from work, but from pretending you're fine. Long day? I asked quietly. Her laugh was low, dry, almost self-mocking. Long life. It slipped out before she could stop it. She blinked, looked away quickly, and I caught that flicker, the kind people show when they realize they've said something too real. I didn't mean, she started. It's okay. She exhaled slowly, brushing her fingers along the edge of the car. Her nails were neat but chipped, her hands small but strong, the kind that had done a lot of holding and letting go. I wanted to tell her she didn't have to explain herself, but I didn't trust what my voice might sound like if I did. Instead, I tightened the last bolt, wiped my palms, and said, "It's done." She stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the faint trace of her perfume. Not sweet, just clean, like soap and rain. She looked at the car, then at me. "Thank you," she said softly, and I swear the word carried more weight than it should have. When she reached out to take the keys, our fingers brushed. Just barely. But the contact felt deliberate, or maybe I only wanted to believe it was. She drew her hand back first, clearing her throat, eyes steady again. "Good night," she murmured, turning toward the door. But before stepping out into the rain, she paused, just long enough for me to see her shoulders rise and fall in a quiet sigh, as if she wanted to say something and changed her mind. The door closed behind her, the bell chimed once, and I was left standing there, with the echo of her voice, the smell of rain, and the faint warmth still lingering on the keys. It started raining harder than I'd seen in months, the kind that made the streetlights blur into streaks of amber. Laura had texted earlier, asking if I could check something quick on her car. It was late, too late for anything routine, but I told her to come anyway. The garage was closed, lights dim, the smell of rain and hot metal mixing in the air. She stepped in, shaking droplets from her coat, her hair darker from the downpour. "Sorry," she said, voice quiet but tense. It started making that noise again. "It's fine," I said, even though it wasn't. She shouldn't have been there. Not alone, not at that hour. While I checked under the hood, she stood beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth from her shoulder. The storm outside muffled everything. The rest of the world disappeared. After a few minutes, she said, "I didn't come just for the car." The wrench slipped in my hand. Barely, but enough to make her notice. She looked down, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "It's just been a bad night," she said finally. I didn't want to be alone. That was the first time she said something that didn't sound like her. Laura was always composed, precise. Now her words were trembling at the edges. "Do you want to sit for a bit?" I asked. She nodded, following me to the small office. The old desk lamp threw a soft circle of light, and we sat opposite each other, her hands clasped, eyes lowered, my heartbeat loud enough to hear. "After a while," she said, "you remind me of someone I used to know. Someone you cared about?" She smiled faintly. "Someone I disappointed." The air went still. She didn't explain, and I didn't ask. Whatever that story was, it hung between us, too personal to touch, too heavy to ignore. The rain got louder, hammering against the metal roof. She looked toward the window, her reflection fractured by the droplets. "Do you ever feel like," she began, then stopped. "No. Never mind." "What?" I asked gently. Her eyes flicked back to mine, soft but cautious. "Like you're standing too close to something you shouldn't want." I didn't breathe for a second. Her phone vibrated then, a name flashing across the screen. Her ex-husband. She turned it face down without answering, her jaw tightening. Neither of us spoke. The sound of rain filled the silence. When she finally looked at me again, her eyes were glassy, not from tears, but from holding too much back. "Sometimes," I said quietly, "I think about that." She didn't move, but something in her shifted, a small intake of breath, the flicker of something dangerous and human. For a heartbeat, it felt like the air itself leaned closer. Her hand brushed the table, not reaching for mine, just tracing the edge where our fingers might have met. Then she stood abruptly, pushing back the chair. "I should go." The words were steady, but her voice wasn't. She grabbed her coat, and as she passed, her sleeve brushed my arm. A fleeting contact that felt like the edge of a confession neither of us were brave enough to say. By the time the door clicked shut, the storm had started to fade. But inside, everything was still trembling. Days passed, but the echo of that night refused to fade. Every sound in the garage, the rattle of tools, the thrum of rain in the gutter, somehow carried her voice inside it. I didn't expect to see her again so soon, but she came by one evening near closing, holding 2 paper cups of coffee like she'd been rehearsing an excuse. "You looked tired last time," she said, setting 1 cup on the counter. "Consider this a peace offering." I took it, unsure if I should thank her or ask what peace we were pretending to make. She looked around, then at me, her gaze heavy but unsure. "I didn't mean to put you in an awkward spot that night." "You didn't," I lied. The silence stretched. It wasn't comfortable anymore. It hummed with everything we weren't saying. Laura sighed and leaned against the counter. The fluorescent light overhead flickered, catching the lines near her eyes, the fatigue around her mouth. She looked like someone who'd been trying too hard for too long. "You ever wish you could just turn off whatever this is?" she asked quietly. "Whatever what is?" She laughed under her breath, no humor in it. "This thing that makes everything complicated. The part that notices when it shouldn't." I didn't have an answer. My hands tightened around the cup, warmth seeping through the cardboard. "You think it's one-sided?" she said after a pause, eyes on the floor. Her voice cracked on the last word, not enough to break, but enough to hear what she'd been trying to hide. I wanted to tell her I thought about her more than I should, that I replayed that night in my head 100 different ways, that I didn't know what I was waiting for anymore. Her, or permission to stop wanting her. But the words tangled in my throat. "Instead," I said, "you don't have to pretend it didn't happen." She looked up then, eyes meeting mine. No anger, just truth. "And what exactly did happen?" I swallowed hard. "Nothing. That's the problem." Her lips parted, a breath, not a word. The space between us felt impossibly fragile, like even moving would shatter it. After a long silence, she whispered, "You're too young to ruin yourself like this." "That's not what this feels like," I said. "It doesn't feel wrong." Her eyes softened, not with affection, but with something heavier. Pity maybe, or fear. She stepped closer, not enough to touch, just enough that I could feel her breath when she spoke. "That's exactly why it is." We stood there for what felt like forever, no words, no movement. Just the sound of the refrigerator humming, the faint hiss of rain outside, the tremor of 2 people who'd finally run out of excuses. Then, almost too quietly to hear, she said, "If I stay 1 minute longer, I'll stop pretending I know better." She left before I could find a reason to stop her. And the silence she left behind, it didn't just fill the room. It filled me. The absence hit harder than I expected. No texts, no visits, not even a casual hello through my girlfriend. It was as if Laura had quietly erased herself from my world. And maybe that was exactly what she needed to do. But then, one evening, she showed up again, not at the garage this time, but outside the cafe across the street. I saw her through the window first, sitting alone with a half-finished tea, your posture too still. I hesitated before walking in. When she looked up and saw me, she didn't smile, just exhaled like she'd been holding her breath too long. "You shouldn't sit alone this late," I said. "I wasn't planning to," she replied softly. Then I realized I didn't have anyone left to call. I sat down opposite her. No one spoke for a long time. The rain outside blurred the glass, the world reduced to a gray hush. Finally, she reached into her bag and placed an old photograph on the table. A younger version of her, maybe in her 20s, standing next to a man with kind eyes and a crooked grin. Her hand rested on his chest. There was no mistaking the closeness. "He died 8 years ago," she said simply. "Car accident." I didn't know what to say. The photo was faded, the edges worn like she'd carried it too often. "I thought I was done grieving," she continued. "Then you came along, and I started feeling things that didn't belong to this part of my life. It scared me." She looked up, eyes raw, honest. "You remind me of him. Not his face, not even his voice. Just how he used to look at me, like I was still allowed to be seen." The world seemed to slow around her words. Every sound, the clink of a spoon, the hum of conversation, faded into static. "I didn't mean to make things complicated," I said, my voice low. "You didn't," she replied, shaking her head. I did. I started mistaking memory for possibility. The confession hit me harder than I expected, because somewhere deep down, I already knew this wasn't just about us. It was about everything she'd lost and everything I didn't yet understand. I wanted to tell her that what I felt wasn't a replacement for anyone, that she wasn't someone's echo, but the words felt too small for the weight in her eyes. Instead, I reached across the table, my fingers brushing the edge of the photograph. He was lucky, I said quietly. For the first time in weeks, she smiled, not to hide behind it, but because it hurt too much not to. You shouldn't say things like that, she whispered. Why? Because I might start believing you. Her hand rested near mine for just a moment, not touching, not quite, and yet it felt like the room had tilted. Outside, the rain slowed to a drizzle, the window clearing just enough for me to see her reflection beside mine. It looked, for a second, like we belonged in the same picture. And that was the part that shook me most. A month had passed, long enough for everything to fade, or so I told myself. But when she walked into the bookstore that afternoon, hair tied back, carrying that same calm weight she always did, my chest tightened like no time had passed at all. She saw me before I could look away. There was no surprise in her eyes, just quiet recognition, like she'd expected this somehow. Hey, I said, voice catching. Hey, she echoed, soft, careful. We stood between aisles, surrounded by the muted scent of paper and dust, the kind of silence that remembers everything you never said. I picked up a random book just to do something with my hands. Didn't think I'd see you here. I come here when I don't want to think, she said. Doesn't usually work. That almost made me smile. She looked older than before, not in a bad way, just more real, less composed. There were faint shadows under her eyes, and the way she held her bag close told me she'd been keeping herself together out of habit. We ended up sitting on the small bench by the window, watching the drizzle outside. Neither of us reached for the other, but the air between us felt gentler now, like a truce. I've been meaning to tell you something, she said. That night at the cafe, I wasn't fair to you. You were honest, I said. Honesty can still hurt someone. I looked down, tracing the worn edge of the seat. You didn't hurt me. She tilted her head slightly, skeptical. You think you're fine? No, I said. But that's not your fault. For a long time, we just sat there, the city lights flickering faintly through the rain-streaked glass. Then she whispered, I miss talking to you. It wasn't a confession, it was a surrender. The kind of truth people say when they're too tired to guard it anymore. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. I miss pretending we were just talking. Her laugh was small, almost silent. Then she turned toward me, eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. You know this can't be simple. It never was, I said. But simple doesn't mean right. She studied me for a moment, as if trying to memorize who I was right then, not who I might become, not who I reminded her of. Just me. Her hand moved, hesitated, then rested lightly on mine. Not searching, not testing, just there. Her skin was cool, her grip steady. We didn't look at each other after that. We just stayed like that, two people who'd spent too long pretending their connection didn't exist. When she finally spoke, it was barely a whisper. I don't know where this goes. Me neither, I said. But maybe we don't have to know. She leaned her head against my shoulder, her breath steady, her heartbeat calm. And for the first time, it didn't feel wrong. It just felt true. Outside, the rain had stopped completely, the street quiet, the air clean, the kind of stillness that only comes after a storm. We didn't move, didn't speak, didn't plan what came next. Because somehow, this silence, shared, earned, and heavy with everything unsaid, was the most honest thing we'd ever had. Back then, I thought silence was emptiness, the space after something breaks. Now I know it's just the sound of what remains. It's been months since Laura and I sat in that bookstore, our hands barely touching, our lives quietly diverging in the days that followed. We didn't fall apart dramatically. There were no arguments, no promises to keep or break. We simply stopped finding reasons to see each other. Maybe because the truth didn't need witnesses anymore. But she never really left. Not completely. Sometimes, when I'm closing the garage and the air smells like rain, I'll think I hear her voice again. Low, calm, asking if I ever get tired of fixing things. And I'll smile, because I finally understand what she meant. She wasn't talking about cars. She was talking about people. About how we keep trying to repair the pieces of ourselves that others left behind. Laura taught me that love doesn't always arrive to stay. Sometimes it shows up just long enough to wake something inside you. A tenderness you didn't know you were capable of. And maybe that's enough. I still catch myself wondering if she ever thinks about that night in the bookstore, the way she leaned her head against my shoulder, how the city outside went completely still, how neither of us said goodbye. Maybe she does. Maybe she doesn't. But I do. Because something shifted in me that day. Not just the way I looked at her, the way I looked at myself. Before her, I thought love was supposed to be loud, obvious, full of fireworks and certainty. With her, I learned it could be quiet, like shared coffee on a bad day, or the brief warmth of a hand that doesn't need to hold on forever to mean something real. Sometimes, when my girlfriend laughs, the one I stayed with, the one who still doesn't know everything, I see a softness in her I might have missed before. I listen more now. I touch her shoulder when she's anxious. I try to see her. Maybe that's what Laura left behind. Not guilt, not longing, but awareness. The kind of awareness that makes you careful. The kind that reminds you some connections aren't meant to be owned, only understood. And in a way, that understanding feels like love too. Just a quieter kind. When I lock up at night, the sound of the key turning echoes in the empty shop, and I sometimes whisper into the stillness. Not to her, but to the memory of what she taught me. That sometimes doing nothing, not chasing, not holding, not fixing, is the most human thing you can do. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?